I caught my sister kissing my boyfriend a week before her wedding. I told her fiancé, but I thought he ignored it. As it turned out, he shocked everyone at the wedding. I was 28, and I found myself in a challenging situation involving my 26-year-old sister and my 29-year-old boyfriend. My sister's wedding was fast approaching. I started to notice that my sister's behavior around my boyfriend was becoming more and more strange. At first, it was just small, subtle things that made me feel uneasy. It began with seemingly innocent comments where my sister would often say things like, "Wow, you're so funny," in response to my boyfriend's jokes. Even when they were not particularly amusing, she laughed a bit too enthusiastically at everything he said. At first I tried to dismiss it, thinking that perhaps she was just being overly friendly due to the excitement surrounding the upcoming wedding. However, as time passed, I began to notice more. I started to notice some worrying signs. She started to find excuses to touch him casually, like placing a hand on his arm during a conversation or lightly bumping into him as she walked past. These gestures were subtle yet unmistakable. I also observed her eyes lingering on him a bit too long when he wasn't looking, which made me feel uneasy. One evening, after we got back from a family dinner where my sister had been particularly flirtatious, I decided to talk to my boyfriend about it. I turned to him and asked, "Did you notice how Sarah was acting tonight?" He looked at me with confusion and replied, "What do you mean?" I told him about the things I'd noticed, the excessive laughing, the unnecessary touching and the lingering glances. He listened, but after a moment he simply shrugged and said, "I think you're overthinking it. She's probably just excited about the wedding. It's harmless." Despite his reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling. I had a feeling that something wasn't right. Despite my boyfriend's reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I decided to keep a closer eye on things, hoping that I was just overreacting and that my suspicions were unfounded. But the next few weeks it was really tense. Every time we were around my sister, I found myself watching her and noticing everything she did. It became clear that she was always trying to position herself near my boyfriend. She would often sit next to him whenever she could. She seemed to find endless excuses to ask for his help with wedding-related tasks, even when I was right there with them. One day, we were all at my parents' house for a family barbecue. At one point, I went inside to use the bathroom. When I returned, I saw something that made my heart sink. My sister and my boyfriend were talking quietly in a corner of the yard. They were standing unusually close to one another. My sister was giggling at something he said. It was a sound that made my stomach turn with unease. The moment they noticed me, they quickly stepped apart. My sister walked away as if nothing had happened. I felt a wave of nausea and anger. But I decided not to confront them on the spot. I wanted to create a scene at the family gathering, but I waited until we got home that night. When we were alone, I tried to approach the topic as calmly as I could. I asked my boyfriend what he and my sister had been discussing earlier. He seemed surprised by my question and explained that they were just talking about some wedding details like the music selection. His response didn't satisfy me. I couldn't help but question why such a simple conversation required them to stand so close together. He sighed and tried to dismiss my concerns, but I pressed him further. He assured me once again that there was nothing going on, insisting that my sister was just being friendly, but by this point, I couldn't hold back my feelings any longer. I expressed my frustration, pointing out that my sister was practically throwing herself at him and he wasn't doing anything to stop it. My words seemed to hurt him, and he looked at me with a pained expression, asking what exactly I expected him to do. He reminded me that she was my sister and he was simply trying to be polite, telling her to back off, which seemed out of the question to him. I told him that he could at least set some boundaries, making it clear that he wasn't interested in anything more than a friendly relationship. He said he wasn't interested in her at all and that there was nothing to clarify because I was seeing problems that didn't exist. Our conversation went in circles with neither of us willing to see the other's point of view, leaving us both frustrated and unsure of what to do next. Without any resolution, it became clear that our conversation was going nowhere. My boyfriend kept insisting that I was just imagining things, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get him to see what was so painfully obvious to me. In the end, we both went to bed feeling angry and frustrated with the issue still. The next day, I realized I needed to have a chat with my sister. I'd been avoiding the issue, but it was only making things worse. So I called her and asked if we could meet for coffee. She was up for it. She sounded really cheerful and like she didn't have a clue about my concerns. We arranged to meet at a small cafe near her apartment. When we met, I was nervous. My hands were trembling slightly as I stirred my coffee. My sister, on the other hand, was in high spirits. She was chatting enthusiastically about her wedding plans. She seemed completely oblivious to my discomfort, which made the situation more difficult for me. After a few minutes of listening to her talk, I realized I couldn't hold it in any longer. I interrupted her mid-sentence, my voice betraying the seriousness of what I was about to say. I told her that we needed to discuss something important. My sister was caught off guard by the sudden shift in tone and looked at me. My sister looked surprised and asked what was wrong. I took a deep breath to steady myself and began to explain. I told her that I had noticed how she had been behaving around Tom, my boyfriend, and that it was making me uncomfortable. I mentioned the flirting, the casual touches, and the lingering looks, things that had been bothering me for some time. I told her that her behavior needed to stop. As I spoke, I watched her face change. At first, she looked surprised, then confused, and finally angry. She demanded to know what I was talking about. She denied flirting with Tom. I refused to back down. I tried to back down, but she insisted she hadn't been flirting with Tom, whether she realized it or not. I explained that her actions were inappropriate and distressing to me. She laughed, but it was forced and dismissive. She said I was being ridiculous and that I was overreacting. She said that Tom was practically family and that she was just being friendly, but her words didn't ease the tension between us. I could tell that this conversation had struck a nerve. It was clear that this was not going to be an easy issue to resolve. I knew things were only going to get worse. I couldn't hold back any longer and told her how frustrated I was. I explained that she was constantly finding excuses to be near my boyfriend, to touch him and to laugh at all his jokes, even the ones that weren't particularly funny. It was obvious to me what she was doing, and it was making me increasingly uncomfortable. As I spoke, I could see her face turn red with anger and disbelief. She was clearly shocked by my accusations, especially since they came so close to her wedding. She responded with a sharp retort, questioning my confidence. She also suggested that I must be insecure to accuse her of such behavior. Her words stung, but I knew I had to stand my ground. I tried to explain that my concerns weren't about insecurity, but rather about respect. I told her she was crossing a line that shouldn't be crossed and that her behavior needed to stop. Without warning, she stood up and moved her chair across the floor, ending the conversation. She said she wasn't going to listen to what she considered paranoid and ridiculous accusations. She made it clear that if I couldn't trust my own sister, then that was the problem wasn't hers. She stormed out of the cafe, leaving me alone with a swirl of emotions. I felt awful and began to question myself, had I overreacted? Was I really just being paranoid? When I returned home, my boyfriend immediately noticed that something was wrong. He asked me what had happened, and I recounted I told him about the conversation I'd just had with my sister. As I shared the details, I could see the concern growing on his face. When I finished, he let out a heavy sigh and told me that he thought I'd made a big mistake. He was worried that Sarah would be deeply hurt, especially with her wedding just around the corner. I asked him if he was taking her side. He quickly reassured me that he wasn't taking sides, but he expressed his doubts that Sarah had been flirting with him, even if she had been, which he found unlikely. He believed that confronting her in such a direct way was not the best approach to handling the situation. His words left me feeling even more unsure of whether I had done the right thing or not, as I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I couldn't help but ask, so what was I supposed to do? Just ignore it. The frustration and hurt were clear in my voice. He wrapped his arms around me and suggested that I could have handled things differently. Perhaps I could have talked to him more about it first or approached Sarah in a less confrontational way. He expressed concern that now, with the way things had unfolded, Sarah was likely upset with both of us, and that this could cast a shadow over her upcoming wedding, making everything feel incredibly awkward and overwhelming. I pulled away from his embrace and questioned him, so this is all my fault. I needed to understand if he truly believed that I was to blame for the situation. He sighed deeply, clearly struggling. He said he didn't mean to blame me, but he did think I might have overreacted. We argued for a while, but it was clear we weren't going to reach a resolution. There was a disconnect in our perspectives, and neither of us seemed willing to understand the other's point of view. He went to bed, leaving me alone with my thoughts and doubts. The days that followed were tense. My sister had stopped speaking to me, creating a painful distance. My parents noticed Sarah was upset, so they called me to ask why. I tried to explain the situation, but it was clear from their responses that they believed I had overreacted. As the wedding day drew closer, I found myself increasingly uncertain about what to do. I was supposed to be a bridesmaid, which I thought was an important role, but now it felt more like a burden. I wasn't even sure if Sarah still wanted me to be part of her big day. My boyfriend was still invited, and he suggested that we both attend to show that there were no hard feelings. But I didn't know if I could go through with it. Watching my sister walk down the aisle while knowing how angry and hurt she was made me feel physically ill. The entire situation had become a tangled mess, and I didn't know how to untangle it without causing even more pain. Several times I tried to phone Sarah, but she didn't answer. She never answered when I left. I left her voicemails apologizing and saying we should have spoken. I even visited her flat, but she closed the door in my face. As the wedding day drew near, I was getting more and more anxious, even though I wasn't convinced. My partner kept urging me to let go and saying that everything would blow over. In a dream, I showed up for the wedding and everyone turned to stare at me. I woke up shaking, coldly pointing and murmuring. After my confrontation with Sarah, things got worse. She accused me of something I didn't do. She wouldn't listen as I tried to explain my perspective. She advised me to resolve the issue immediately. I apologized to Sarah. The stress on our family was intolerable. Sarah still avoids talking to me. My parents are offended as well. Tom, my partner, persisted. When I told him I was exaggerating, he just made me feel worse. I went to my parents' house to try to sort things out 1 week before the wedding. I heard voices outside the house as I got to the front door. I went to the garden and stopped in shock. When I saw what was going on, Sarah and Tom were partly hidden behind a big plant. They were locked in a passionate hug and kissing each other firmly. Sarah's legs were wrapped around Tom's waist, and his hand was beneath her top. They were completely absorbed in each other and didn't even notice me standing there. I was so shocked, I couldn't breathe. I stood there for a minute, unable to move or speak. I was angry and betrayed. My emotions took over, and I started screaming, "What the hell is this?" My voice trembled with I was overwhelmed by the intensity of my emotions. My sister and boyfriend reacted immediately, looking shocked and guilty. Sarah's face drained of color as she realized she had been caught. Tom was stammering, trying to find the right words. It was exactly what I thought it would be. It confirmed all my suspicions and fears. I started to cry as I asked them how they could do this to me. Sarah was crying too. She sounded regretful. As she tried to apologize, she said, "I'm so sorry." She was struggling to explain that they didn't mean for this to happen. But I couldn't stand to hear any of their excuses. The betrayal was too deep and too raw. Without another word, I turned and fled, running back to my car. Their desperate calls for me to return fell on deaf ears. I drove away, my mind reeling from disbelief and hurt. As I sped away, my phone began to ring repeatedly. First Tom, then Sarah, and finally my mom. I couldn't bring myself to answer any of them. The pain was still too fresh and overwhelming. When I finally arrived home, I felt numb. I immediately packed a bag with some clothes. I packed a few essentials and left. I couldn't stay here after what had just happened. I sent Tom a text saying we're done and to not contact me again. Then I turned off my phone and left. I'm now writing this from a hotel room nearby. I'm in a bit of a pickle. With the wedding just a few days away, I'm not sure what my next step should be. I know there's no way I can attend. My relationship is shattered, and the bond one once shared with my sister may be irreparably damaged by this betrayal. It feels as though my entire world has been turned upside down. I feel like I was crazy for suspecting something was wrong, but I was right all along. The pain of that realization is almost too much to bear. I find myself questioning how I will ever be able to trust anyone again after this. So, Reddit, any advice on how to move forward from here would be appreciated. I wanted to give you an update on what's been going on. When I found out that my sister Sarah was seeing my ex-boyfriend Tom, I was pretty shocked. I spent a few days trying to process what had happened. My phone was constantly buzzing with messages and missed calls from both of them, as well as from my parents. But I just couldn't bring myself to. I was too overwhelmed and too hurt to respond. Eventually though I came to see that Mark, Sarah's fiancé, was one person who definitely needed to know the truth. With a heavy heart, I made the difficult decision to call him. When Mark answered, I could hear the confusion in his voice. He asked what was going on, mentioning that I told him that Sarah had been in a terrible state, saying that I had disappeared and wasn't responding to anyone. I took a deep breath and began to explain everything to him. I told him about the suspicions I had initially had, how everyone, including Tom and Sarah, had brushed off my concerns. Then I described in detail the scene I had witnessed in my parents' garden. Mark listened quietly, not interrupting, only occasionally making a small noise to let me know he was still there, absorbing everything I was saying. When I finally finished, there was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. Then, in a controlled, measured voice, Mark simply thanked me for telling him and said he needed some time to process this information. He ended the call, and I sat there staring blankly at my phone, wondering what Mark would do now that he knew the truth. As the wedding day approached, I heard nothing further from him or from the rest of my family. Sarah had ceased trying to contact me, and I began to suspect that she had somehow managed to convince Mark to forgive her. The thought that she might actually escape the consequences of her actions made me feel physically ill. I realized there was no way I could attend the wedding. I couldn't bear the thought of watching Sarah walk down the aisle knowing what she had done. Instead, I decided to spend that day alone, focusing on how to rebuild my life in the wake of such a profound betrayal. On the evening of the wedding, I got a call from my cousin Emma. She was really excited and said, "Oh my God, you won't believe what just happened." I was confused and intrigued, so I asked her what it was about. She didn't hesitate and told me. Everything seemed normal at first. Sarah looked stunning in her wedding dress and Mark was standing at the altar, ready for the ceremony to begin. But when it came time for the vows, Mark stepped forward and announced that he had something to say. I could feel my heart racing as I listened to Emma describe the scene. Mark was in front of everyone, declaring that he couldn't go through with the wedding. He told the guests that he couldn't marry someone who had betrayed her own sister and devastated her life by getting involved with her boyfriend. Emma continued recounting how Sarah had turned completely. Mark's words had a big impact on everyone. He turned to my parents and apologized, explaining that he needed to tell them the real reason why I had distanced myself from the family. Emma said that Sarah had started crying, and my parents were left feeling surprised and confused. The guests were also taken aback. They were whispering among themselves, trying to make sense of things. Mark had then walked out of the church, leaving Sarah sobbing alone at the altar. It was like something out of a movie. Emma told me her voice still sounded surprised. Everyone's in shock. Your parents are trying to get the full story from Sarah, but she's an emotional wreck. As I sat there, absorbing everything Emma had just told me, I felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, there was a sense of vindication, knowing that the truth had finally been. I felt a mix of emotions. On the one hand, I was relieved to finally know the truth. But on the other hand, I couldn't help but feel sad for the pain and turmoil this had brought upon my family. Emma, sensing my silence, asked, "Are you okay?" "I'm not sure," I replied. I never wanted it to end like this. The truth was now clear, but it didn't instantly fix everything. Healing and rebuilding trust would take a long time. But I felt a little relief for the first time since this whole thing started. At least now I could start moving on without the weight of silent facts holding me back. I'm not sure what to do next, but I know I'll eventually have to tell my family. For now, I'm just living one day at a time. If nothing else, this has shown me the value of following my gut feeling. And defending myself, even in front of people who question me. To all who helped me through my journey, thank you. Your words of encouragement have been invaluable. And to others in the same circumstances, remember to trust your instincts and don't let anyone make you doubt your own perceptions. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.